Welcome back to Close Up. Every New Hampshire primary is different. This one has been more different than most, to put it mildly. But one constant and really one of the foundational aspects of the primary has been getting accurate election results on election night. There is some hand-wringing going on over what will happen on January 23rd, with potentially tens of thousands of write-in votes for Joe Biden to be hand-counted, that things might not go as smoothly as they usually do. Here to discuss the effort to ensure things do go as planned is Secretary of State David Scanlon. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, good morning, Adam.
So let's talk about turnout first. Your prediction is still a little ways off. You're still doing the math and all the formulas and however it is that you come up with those numbers. But do you think we could see, with the fact that there is a write-in campaign and that Biden is not on the ballot in New Hampshire, that turnout might be warped a little bit in terms of those undeclareds moving in one direction rather than another?
So the energy in this primary election is definitely on the Republican side. You know, the Republican candidates, major candidates, are spending a lot of time in New Hampshire, and they're generating a lot of interest. And so I would expect that the voting on the Republican side is going to be fairly high. Typically, when an incumbent president is running in a primary, the turnout is lower than you might expect, especially if it was an open seat. What is interesting to me is that we have this write-in effort going on for an incumbent president, and I'm trying to figure out how that is going to affect the numbers on Election Day.
Because certainly the Democrats are asking their base to turn out and write in Joe Biden. All along, you've been very confident in saying we're going to have election results on election night on January 23rd. Do you still feel that way?
Absolutely. And so there are still over 100 communities in New Hampshire that hand count their ballots. And typically when you have a ballot that has one race, vote for one, it is a sort and stack method. So they will just be taking the ballots out of the ballot box, putting them in the piles for the candidate that received the vote, including write-ins for Joe Biden. So there should not be a whole lot of difference in that effort. The work will come in the towns that use machines to count their ballots. And after the polls close, the moderator is going to have to go through all of the ballots and sort out the ones that have the write-in votes on them, and then count those by hand. Again, it's one race, vote for one. So as long as they have the extra help on hand, it really should not take that much more time to get that job done.
Is the extra help going to be there? We know the call for volunteers has gone out. Do you like the numbers that you're seeing right now so far?
I have not been hearing that there are major problems finding the extra help to do that. And the great thing about New Hampshire elections, and what makes us different from other states, is that the elections are run at the local level. And it's the members of those communities, the towns and the city wards, that actually elect their election officials, the people that run the election, and it's up to those individuals to encourage their neighbors and friends to come and help participate in conducting the election. And so we have put on some extra effort this time around to try and encourage people, voters, to sign up as volunteers at the election to help their community. It's a great public service. It's actually a very rewarding experience. And if voters are interested in that, they should contact their local clerk or moderator and say, how can I help?
You talk about the hand count towns being primed and ready for this already, but what about your Manchesters, Concords, the Nashuas of the world, where there are going to be a lot more ballots that are write-in that have to be hand counted? Do you have a ballpark on just how much more time that would take? Say, we're normally getting results between 8 and 10. Could it be like 11 o'clock?
I think it depends on how well they staff up. But bottom line is, I would expect that the results are going to be coming in before the night's over. And I don't expect there's going to be a huge delay in those results because there's a major write-in campaign going on.
Specific to the write-in campaign, you know, we have the write-in campaign saying write in Joe Biden, check the box. What kind of leeway do voters have if they do write in something like Biden and then don't check the box?
So our message to voters is that if you are going to write in a candidate's name, write in the full name of the candidate and fill in the oval next to the name. Aside from that, when it comes to counting the ballots, the instructions that we are giving to the moderators and the poll workers generally is that what is important when you're counting that vote is, can you determine the voter's intent? So if somebody wrote in the name of a candidate and they did not fill in the oval, that does not disqualify that vote. It would be, the intent of that voter would be for the name that they actually wrote on the ballot, and that's how that ballot would be counted.
And back to the overall nature of the contest, there obviously is a Republican and a Democratic primary, but all the ballots are going to one place. Could this process on the Democratic side delay at all the results on the Republican side?
I think we're going to be talking with local election officials about when they should report results, whether they should wait and do everything at the same time, or if they have the Republican results earlier than the Democratic ones, to go ahead and report those. We're having some internal discussions about what we're going to recommend in that regard.
Yeah, the guidance, right, is normally, because I guess those reported numbers that come to us first, it tends to be that the moderator or the town clerk reads the tape, right? The machine prints it out and they announce a number. This time around, that's obviously not going to reflect any of the votes for President Biden. So you're saying there's a discussion going on about what kind of guidance to give those folks, about what to say, because the information they have from the paper isn't giving a full picture.
Right, and there's two separate elections going on, the Republican primary and the Democratic primary, and they are distinctly different. In a typical election, you're right, in a machine count town, there's a tape that comes out with results on them, and then there are always a few ballots that have to be hand counted for whatever reason. That's done. Those totals are added to the machine tape, and then the moderator can announce the results at the polling place. It's very likely that the Republican results will be ready earlier than the Democratic ones because of all of the hand counting. And so the question is, do we wait and announce all of the results at the same time for both elections, or do we announce the Republican ones first and then the Democratic ones after? That decision will be made fairly soon.
Yeah, and you know, your town and city clerks, your moderators, even those that are elected, you try to keep them separate from politics and the political process. But this time around, that count is political, right? Because it's always been the national attention on New Hampshire, on those quick results, those accurate results. To what extent do you think that you bring that awareness to them, if they don't already know it, that, hey, by the way, you know, the future of the New Hampshire primary, at least on the Democratic side, could be riding on the fact of whether or not we get these in a timely fashion?
We have communicated that to election officials, that it is important to get the results in the night of the election. There may be some isolated instances where it goes after midnight, and our state law says that once the election begins, it's a nonstop process. The polls close at the appropriate time, and then the counting begins, and that does not end until the job is done and the results are announced.
Your colleague in Maine had just unilaterally decided to disqualify former President Trump from the primary ballot there. Of course, you took a different route entirely and said that you're not going to do anything absent some kind of judicial decision regarding Trump's eligibility for office. Can you be more specific, though, in case that, you know, down the line Trump's the nominee and we revisit this whole process again? Can you be more specific about what you would need to see from a court in order to take action?
Well, I think that the United States Supreme Court is the authority on whether a candidate is qualified to be on the general election ballot or not. And I think we have to wait and see what they say, if they say anything in that regard. The concern that I had when I made the decision that Trump's name should go on the ballot because of our law and the Constitution was that if we had individual states in the country that don't have the name on the ballot or have the name on the ballot, that there is going to be anger and confusion as a result of that. And I think we're going to see that play out if, you know, what's happening in some of the other states stands. And we also have to remember that the process we're going through right now is not actually voting for president. It is voting to award delegates to candidates for president that will then go to the National Convention, and it will be the National Conventions that will have that discussion and determine who the nominee is going to be. So I think, and I think the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution is abstract enough that it really doesn't give direction on, you know, which ballots the name should or should not appear on. So I think what we're going through now is premature.
Yeah, and the discussion and debate is likely to continue. Secretary Scanlon, thanks for being here on Close Up. Good luck in
Thank you.
the primary.